Guys, today I'm going to explain experiment 5 statistical inference from the data science ecosystem lab. In this experiment, we are using a supermarket data set and applying a different statistical methods. We start with the sample mean and population mean, then we calculate confidence intervals and understand how the confidence level changes the interval. After that, we find the relationship between the variables using Pearson and Spearman correlation. Also, we calculate the covariance and represent the correlation using a heat map. And finally, we will perform a Z-test to test a given claim. So this experiment may help us to understand how we can use statistics to analyze the data and make conclusions from it. Now I will explain each questions one by one. First question is like we are taking the sample mean as 500. First we take 500 female customer records. Then we take their unit price values and we calculate the average price of that column. So this question basically finding the sample mean. Next, second question is calculating with sample mean of 1000. In first question, we have done with sample mean with 500. Now we are taking 1000 records instead of 500. Then we calculate their average unit price, and this helps us to see how a larger sample affects the mean. Next, third question is to calculate the population mean. Here we take all the female customer records. We use their unit price values. Then we calculate their overall average, and this gives us the population mean. Next, fourth question is to calculate the 95% confidence intervals. Here we take 500 unit price values and we calculate the sample mean and standard deviation. Then we find the 95% confidence interval and its value will be approximately 1.96. Finally, we check whether the population mean comes inside this range. Next, question 5 is to calculate the confidence interval 99%. In previous, we have taken the confidence interval as 95%. Here we take 99%, which value is approximately 2.567. And here also we are taking the same 500 values, but instead of 95%, we are using 99% confidence. Because the confidence is higher, the interval becomes wider. If it's smaller, then it will be a narrower. So this question shows us the difference between the 95% and 99% confidence. Next, question 6 is about 25 trials. Here we are repeating the confidence interval calculation 25 times to understand the data very well. Each time we take a different sample of 500. We calculate 95% confidence interval for every sample. Finally, we draw all the intervals in this graph. Next, seventh question is Pearson correlation. Here we have hand size and height and I want to know whether they are related to one another. So we use a Pearson correlation. It tells us the strength and the direction of their linear relationship. Next, Spearman correlation. Here we again use hand size and height as such as the Pearson correlation, but this time we use a Spearman correlation. It checks the relationship based on the rank of the values. So it tells us whether both variables generally increase or decrease together. Next, ninth question is the covariance and heat map. Here we take several numerical columns from the data set. First, we calculate the covariance to see how the variable changes together. Then we calculate the correlation. And finally, we show the relationship visually using a heat map. Next, 10th question is to calculate the Z-test. Finally, we claim about high protein gain. We use the sample data to test whether the claim is true. We calculate the Z value and compare it with the critical value 1.645. Since the calculated value is 1.289, the claim is not supported by the sample evidence. So this experiment is about using the statistics to understand and analyze the data. First, we calculate the sample mean and population mean using the unit price data. Then we calculate the 95% and 99% confidence intervals and observe how the interval changes. Next, we find Pearson and Spearman correlation to understand the relationship between the variables. We also calculate the covariance and the heat map to visualize the correlations. Finally, we perform a Z-test to test the high protein grain claim. This calculated Z value is 1.29, which is less than the critical value 1.645. So the claim is not supported. Here we need to know what is the difference between the Pearson and Spearman correlations. Pearson measures the linear relationship, but Spearman measures the monotonic or rank relationship. And Pearson uses actual values, but in Spearman uses the rank of the values. And Pearson suitable when data follows a linear pattern, and Spearman useful when it is relationship is not necessarily linear. Pearson is more affected by the outliers, but Spearman is less affected by the outliers. Pearson examples like calculating the height and weight with the linear time, and Spearman examples ranking of students and their performance. Overall, this experiment shows how statistical methods can be used to analyze the data and make the decisions. Thank you.